Hey everyone, Dr. Butler here, and I have a special guest, Terrence Teixeira, and he is the Paralympic Games Manager at the International Paralympic Committee. So we're so happy to have you today, and we really appreciate you taking the time to just sit down and tell us a little bit about what you do. So can you just, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you work, your title, all that good stuff?
Perfect. Definitely. But first off, just thank you for having me. It's always good to catch up. So happy to have this little chat with you. Um, so as you were saying, I'm Terrence Teixeira and originally from Canada, but currently living in Scotland at the moment. A little bit of background about me is I've always been very, very involved and interested in sport from a very young age, whether it's just kicking a soccer ball around the field or a bit more at the competitive level where I've represented Canada in both triathlon and figure skating, and managed to kind of pivot from athlete to actually in the sport administrative and management world, where I now currently work for the International Paralympic Committee, which were based in Germany. So I spent quite a bit of time in Germany, but given the current context, I'm back home in Scotland. And my current role is the Paralympic Games Manager, where I oversee all of the different various editions of the Paralympic Games.
Very, very cool. And first off, I want to apologize for messing up your last name. So apologize for that. You have a very exciting job. You're, living in another Commonwealth country, which we'll talk a little bit more about in this interview, but going from, Canada, now living in Scotland and working in different places like Germany. So can you just tell us, just about your journey and how you came to be in the position you are now from college until now?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of from an education and university standpoint, I started off, I think maybe a bit more traditional route. I started off in business. I was working in accounting, so started off working at KPMG, and then just felt I wanted a bit of a shift. Accounting wasn't quite for me, so took a bit of a detour and did a master's degree in public policy. And that's where I first started to realize that there's something quite interesting about sport and how sport played into a bigger picture. It just wasn't about who won a gold medal, but actually sport had the potential to make some major change. So during that master's degree, I really focused on academic writing as it related to sport hosting and the impact that hosting an event could have on your city. And then figured the best way to try to enact change that way was to work in government. So for around 4 or 5 years, provided advice to politicians on a whole range of issues. And during that time, I was very fortunate to have a home Olympics and Paralympics in my own country. And that was the Vancouver Games in 2010. Took a little bit of a pause from my typical day job. I went over to Vancouver for 5 or 6 weeks and got involved in that capacity. And that was when I really first realized that actually working at a major event was actually a job. It wasn't just something you did on a weekend and volunteered. You could volunteer, but not just volunteer for a few days, but this could actually be something I really wanted to do moving forwards. So once I got back home, started to do my research and found a really unique program, which is a master's in Olympic studies based in Greece, and it's through the International Olympic Academy, which is affiliated with the IOC and also a university in Greece. And so was fortunate enough to get accepted into this program and spend a year living in Olympia, Greece, learning and interacting with students and professors from all over the world. And for me, that was really kind of the jumping point into the career I have now. And since then was able to get my foot in the door with the Canadian Olympic Committee. And from there have essentially been what's known as a games gypsy, which I'm not sure is the most politically correct term, but it's kind of the terminology we use for someone who goes from games to games and kind of follows the whim of the game. So started off in Glasgow for a year, then another home games in Toronto, and then off a bit more on a worldly journey to Australia for 3 years for the Commonwealth Games and Invictus Games. And that landed me here working for the Paralympic Committee.
You've had a very exciting career, and I remember meeting you at NAS and just hearing your presentation. and just was so blown away by it. So I'm just so happy we can reconnect, and you could share everything with the students and everything you've been up to with all the different mega sporting events, on all these continents. So I want to backtrack real quick. And so can you just tell us a little bit about your time at the International Olympic Academy in Olympia, Greece? Because I know there's some students out there that are looking to do some master's degrees and they're trying to figure out what fits them. But I would love if you could talk about that for a second.
Definitely. This is a program that I would recommend to absolutely everybody to take a look into. So it's a master's in Olympic studies, but it also covers sports management, Olympic education, how to run events. So it's just a great program, and it's based in Olympia, and might have changed a little bit since then, but during my time, they accepted 30 students, and it was 30 students from 30 different countries. So you really had this global worldly outlook, and it brought everyone together. And it was broken up into different semesters, and each week we had a different professor from a different country come and teach us, and they each brought their own focus and unique input, whether it was learning about how marketing might work in Australia, or how a particular policy or really grassroots sports organization kind of starts and flourishes in South Africa. So it was just a very unique opportunity, which I haven't really seen in other, not just other sport management programs, but kind of any other degree. And it culminated with a major research project, which I took the opportunity to base it on home games as well. One being in an unsuccessful games bid in Toronto. And I think for me, one of the big outcomes from going to that institution was just a connection and a network, where you automatically have a network of 30 different countries. And as everyone goes back home and starts working in their own sporting organizations, that network just keeps on growing and growing. So that was just one of the major benefits, which I didn't think of right away, and only continues to prosper and increase as time goes on.
Very, very cool. I actually had the opportunity to go visit a couple years ago, and the only reason I figured out that I could, go was because of you and what you shared with me a few years ago. So you actually inspired me to apply and go for a couple weeks.
Wow.
It wasn't a whole program like you did, but I just got, a little taste, and your experience sounds really amazing.
Yeah, well, I'm happy you had the opportunity to go and live a little bit of Olympia life. As you know, it's 400 meters from the ancient Olympic track, and just I think being in that whole environment just makes you think differently, and just brings a smile on your face every time you just walk out those gates and you see the ancient Olympic Stadium right in front of you. And at least for me, it's literally been a talking point in any single interview I have. So I'm not sure if you found this in your discourse or being able to talk to people, but literally having that on my CV, people have said, we kind of want to interview you just to ask what this program is. It's really unique. It's really different. So again, just one of those things for anyone out there looking to get into the sport industry, finding those little things that make you unique, that can connect with people. This degree opportunity definitely did that for me, as I think in every interview, someone has said, just put the interview on hold for a sec, tell me about this program and what was it? So for me, it's been an extra bonus in that sense as well.
Absolutely. I haven't had that. I mean, I just went to a workshop, but what I got out of it, I was able to meet so many people from, around the world, about 50 different educators from 50 different countries. And so we have a WhatsApp group chat going on. So that was nice connecting, especially during COVID, because I got to know what was going on in Spain and Egypt and, Brazil and all these places. And we were all able to help each other out with research and all of that. So that's been really special. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. And I know the students out there listening are probably Googling it right now as we speak. Perfect. So my next question to you, I'm going to backtrack again, but you work with the Invictus Games and the Commonwealth Games. Mm-hmm. So some of our students are not aware about these international events. So can you tell us a little bit about them, and then also what you did?
For sure. And I think that's a really good point. There's this whole other layer of sporting events out there. I think a lot of people know about the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games. And then everyone kind of knows about your national competitions that might be happening, your US Olympic trials or any national competitions. And then there's kind of this in-between layer as well, between your national and Olympics and Paralympics, and these are regional games. So literally almost every single region in the world has their own regional games. In North America, we have the Pan Am and Para-Pan Am games, there's the Asian games, and then there's also other games that are based on not just geography, but perhaps a bit of history. And that's where the Commonwealth Games comes into that. And it's 71 nations that used to or are still a part of the Commonwealth. And we see that with other games as well. There's the Mediterranean Games for all of the countries around the Mediterranean. There's the Island Games, which is just for if you're an island. That's the only way you can compete is if your country is an island. So there's these other ways that they kind of categorize it. And for me, the Commonwealth Games was quite special, being a Canadian and as part of the Commonwealth Games. So I had this opportunity to work two of them, actually, one in Glasgow in Scotland, and then one at the other end of the world, spending 2.5 years in Australia working in Gold Coast on those Commonwealth Games. And again, it's kind of a different mentality than the Olympic Games or Paralympic Games, but you have so many athletes who are using this as a springboard or as a qualifier into those type of events. So for them, and for some people who might not make it to the Olympics or Paralympics, this is the pinnacle of their sporting career. And then on the flip side, you have something about the Invictus Games, which is not necessarily a games that's just about sport and just about trying to make it to that next level. Whereas the Invictus Games was created by Prince Harry. It was one of his initiatives. It started, the very first one, I believe, was in London and then went to Orlando in 2014. And the focus is much different. It's focused not on just the athlete, it's focused on the complete athlete journey. The games are for people who are wounded veterans. And the idea here is that this sporting event is a part of their journey of rehabilitation. These wounded veterans have been used to putting a flag on their shoulder. They've been used to going out onto a very different type of field of play and fighting and doing their best. And for some of them, that's been taken away from them. So here's their first opportunity after something horrific may have happened to them, where they can put back on their country's flag and they can get back out there in a team setting and really fight for something and really go after another goal. So the focus was very different in the sense that a lot of countries who participated in the Invictus Games wouldn't send their best performing athletes, but really felt athletes who could benefit the most from them. Who were some athletes who had mental health conditions that really needed just to feel that empowerment? They were getting selected for the teams, not the one who's going to score the most amount of goals. So again, for us working on those games, we had to remember that the focus wasn't about the athlete per se and their performance. It was about their entire family. And again, just the way that we organized the games was different. It was about that support network and that support system. And I think there was some other really interesting things about those games, which I've never really had to think about before. We couldn't have fireworks at opening or closing ceremonies because that might bring back triggering memories. During a tennis match, there was a helicopter that flew over because it was a broadcasting helicopter and then it was filming footage of the tennis. But one athlete just stopped and could not compete again until the helicopter left. If this was another kind of tournament, it just simply would have said, you need to keep on competing. It's a broadcast event. You either play or you forfeit. But here we had to change that, and we actually had to change how we filmed it on the spot to allow those competitors to compete and not let that be a triggering impact that actually forced them to quit. So it's completely different type of scenario. So again, these games, these regional games can be very different than your national championships or Olympics and Paralympics. So definitely some great insight and great learning that you can then take to other events as well.
Wow, I have chills right now. Just everything that you're doing, it just sounds so meaningful. I mean, it is meaningful, right? And right now we're talking a lot about athletes and mental health and just, everything with Naomi Osaka has happened this week. So I just feel it's so on point with what you're talking about with events and everything going on with competitions. Also too, so, this brings me into the next question I have for you, but it seems like you have consistently been working with athletes with, disabilities, right? So with the Commonwealth Games and then also with the Invictus Games, and then now with the Paralympics. So can you tell us a little bit about your time with the Paralympics and, your responsibilities, your role, all of that?
Yeah, for sure. And definitely that's kind of been a big passion of mine, is working with athletes with a disability. And also that the notion that sport can be more than sport. Sport can actually be a great catalyst for change. And that's really what drove me to the Paralympic movement and the International Paralympic Committee, or as we call it, the IPC. And maybe I'll just give a quick background on the IPC, because I think a lot of people know about the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, but maybe a bit less on the IPC side. So similar to how the IOC are the owners of the Olympics, the IPC are owners of the Paralympics. And we're actually two separate organizations in two separate countries. The IOC is in Switzerland and the IPC, we're based in Germany. And we run two different events, which has some complexities, but also some benefits as well. And it all started with the very first Paralympic Games kicking off in 1948, when just after the war, it was used as a tool to assist people who were injured in the war. So much more along the lines of the Invictus Games. But then momentum built, and it moved away from solely being an event that was just for rehabilitation. It became a very high performance sport. And we start to see a change with the Olympics and Paralympics being in the same city. It wasn't until 1988 when the Olympics and Paralympics had to be in the same city moving forward. So that was a really great initiative that we could then piggyback and work together. But the Paralympic movement really looks at how sport can make for a more inclusive world. Projects that I'm working on look at how do we change legislation in a city? How can we change attitudes? 15% of the world's population, so that's 1 billion people, live with a disability. And so how can we as a sport movement work with different partners, whether that's the IOC, the United Nations, our partners, our host cities, with institutions and universities and students? How can we work with everyone to collectively make for a better world through sport? And so for me, that driving force and that kind of vision and mission of the IPC is what really brought me to it. And I've been really fortunate in my current role as Paralympic Games manager. And so what I do in this capacity is I work with all future host cities. So right now we know the next games in a few months are in Tokyo, then we're off to Beijing, Paris in 2024. We have two more games that we know of in Milano Cortina, and then in the US for LA 28. So I work with all of them, and I work on their journey. How are they planning their games? How are they delivering their games? What are their strategies? What are they doing to make it unique? And really my focus is on the legacy piece, and how are we going to make sure that you hosting these games is going to change your city for these 1 billion people in the world who have a disability. And although a games is awarded 7 years in advance, or for LA, a very unique 11 years in advance, this time goes by really, really quickly. And so working in this capacity of Paralympic Games manager, a lot of people ask, why are you working with LA for 8 years? And I kind of give a quick wedding analogy. To that, a lot of people, to plan a wedding, it might be a year or 2 years in the making, and that's two people getting married. But in the Olympics or Paralympics, you have 5,000 or 10,000 athletes. You don't just have the parents of the people getting married, you also have all of the host nations, which are upwards of 200s, and you have 1 billion, 2 billion people watching on TV, not just the 200 or 100 you have. So you try to extrapolate that out from your 1 year wedding planning out to your 7 year. And so that's why we work quite hard at the IPC on working with cities right from the outset for those games. And yes, so that was kind of just a quick rundown of the Paralympics Games manager. And so work really close with the cities, and actually there's a massive involvement with the IOC as well. So work really closely with them because we know that if the Olympics are set up and ready to go, we have 2 weeks until the Paralympics. So we need to try to implement as many things prior to the Olympics happening. So we don't just want to throw up a ramp or make these changes in those 2 weeks. We want to try to integrate it into the overall planning from the very outset. So we work very closely with the IOC on that.
Very nice. That is so exciting. And then just so much to look forward to. So with that being said, Tokyo 2020 no longer, right? Tokyo 2021. And I just saw that the first athletes arrived and they're quarantining and all of that. And just from what I've been reading, it seems like Tokyo was really prepared as far as trying to get their city ready and wanting to leave a legacy impact of just creating a more accessible city. So can you tell us just a little bit more about that, since it's happening right now, and just the legacy of Tokyo and how COVID-19 is having an impact on your plans right now?
Definitely. Tokyo, and we still call it, it's quite funny, we call it Tokyo 2020, just because at the point when the games were canceled, so much was already produced. All of the licensing, all of the field of play banners, everything was produced. So we've just kept it Tokyo 2020 in 2021. So that's always a funny discussion to say, oh, it's almost Tokyo 2020, even though it seems that it's done. But yeah, so COVID-19 obviously had a massive impact. These are the first games that have been postponed ever, and the first time that the games were shifted outside of wartime. So it's a very unique position to be in. But on the Tokyo side, their legacy, they were definitely the most prepared city going into any Paralympic Games. We were we were ready pretty much from 2016 when Rio was hosting the games. We could have quite easily have gone to Tokyo almost back then and run the games. Some of Tokyo's biggest legacy pieces really that we've had to work on are twofold. One being intangible, which is the changing of attitudes. Whenever you go into a country, you really have to think about the cultural awareness and how you fit in with that particular culture. And so working within the Japanese context, it's very hierarchical. It's very different than, say, how Canada and the US might work. So I think the first thing that we worked on was a lot of changing of awareness and acceptance and language when it came to people with a disability. And we're seeing that play out more and more with more people on the television having a disability, more presenters. They're really trying to ramp that up in light of the games. So we're hoping that once you build up that population, that's more visible and more aware, and the language is out there, that continues on. And something more tangible was the amount of accessible hotel rooms in Japan was incredibly small, was not nearly enough for us to host the games. And so we've worked with them, we've worked on their legislation, we've augmented their legislation. So any new hotel, any new building that's going to be built in Japan needs to meet these minimum requirements as well. So I think that's going to be actually one of the biggest legacy pieces, is accessible hotel rooms. And although that might seem quite small, when you look at tourism as an industry, if a person with a disability, and I'll go back to that 1 billion number, can't come and stay in your city, you're also losing out on this large market from a financial standpoint afterwards the games. So it'll be interesting when we do our follow-up analysis and follow-up reports to see how this combination of an intangible change on attitude and awareness combined with more tourism opportunities really brings Tokyo more to the forefront and a destination of choice for people with a disability.
Wow. I mean, you all have done so much, and just seeing the breakdown, just as far as how everything works with the IPC, along with the local governments, along with the event planning, and just the legacy impact that you do leave on these cities. So that's pretty amazing. And I'm excited to see, what happens here with like LA and the US and, all these other cities, because I don't think a lot of people realize, right? I know that when I teach, I always have to make people aware, hey, the Paralympics happen a couple weeks after the Olympics, and all of that. Now with the US OC, no longer the US OC, but the US OPC, right? We're able to have more discussions about the Olympics and the Paralympics and what that means. So thank you for putting context into all of that and just telling us what Tokyo has been up to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Terminology and wording is so important. Although the USO, what was the USOC, had the Olympics and Paralympic team athletes under the same building, under the same banner, not having the word Paralympic in there really didn't allow for that conversation to happen. So officially changing their name last year to the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee has such a big impact.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my next question to you, and can you just tell us what an average week looks like. I'm pretty sure you don't have an average week, but what an average week could possibly even look like.
Yeah, and I know it's gonna sound like that typical answer, Laura, there is no typical week. I think what's constant is constant interaction and constant collaboration with the IOC and with all of those future OCOGs, future organizing committees. So I think that is the one constant in any week, is lots of collaboration with people outside of the IPC to make these things happen. And I think what makes it so unique and so different is that we're working on a games you could view it as one big project. Is that certain games you're getting closer to, so the amount of interaction and focus and attention switches. So the amount of detail work that I'm doing on Tokyo is much different than, say, the amount of detail work I'm doing on LA. But as we get closer to LA, that will switch and the focus will switch and their issues and challenges will switch as well. So it's kind of a constantly moving target. One thing that COVID has made more challenging is limited our ability to move and visit these cities. So we used to spend a lot more time on the road and actually going and visiting, interacting with these stakeholders in person, seeing these venues in person, but that has had to change. So that's one thing, that I'm actually spending more time on video conferences than I might have with in-person interactions. But the really neat thing about the job is how much it can vary within one day. So you could spend the morning talking to people from Tokyo about very specific issues related to the sport program. And then you move to lunchtime where you're now speaking to Europe, who is now awake, and you could be speaking to Paris around how are we going to make their metro system, which is over 100 years old, how are we going to make that accessible for the games? How are we going to make sure that we can move around 300,000 people who are going to come here and watch the games who have a disability? Then something slightly more lighter, we could be talking to Milano Cortina about their mascot and what their mascot's going to look like, what their mascot's going to do, how big is it? Can you make sure the mascot can fit through a door? Because that's a big issue with some mascots. Their arms are big and they're too big to go through doors. So you could be talking about some things like that. And then finish up working with the IOC on when we write contracts for future host cities, what's that going to look like? How are we changing words? How is what we're learning in Tokyo making it different for what we want LA to do when we sign contracts with them? So it's a very varied day, and you're speaking to people from a bunch of different cultures, bunch of different ways how you interact. So from phone call to phone call, you're even changing how you interact, the language you use as well. So it's quite interesting in that sense.
Wow. I mean, just everything you do, you wear so many hats, right? How big is the mascot going to be to, what about this 100-year-old public transportation, just everything going on. So that brings me to my next question, COVID-19 and your current roles and responsibilities. You did touch a little bit on that, but, do you want to say anything more about that, just as far as not being able to actually physically be there? How has that had an impact on your current position?
Yes, I think it's changed a few things. I think one, it's just changed the whole entire sport world. The sport world has always been so much about face-to-face interaction, being on the ground, being at the venues, and we really haven't had the opportunity to do that. It's been quite a while since anyone or I've been out to Tokyo or any of the other host cities, being Paris or Beijing. So there's a lot of trust that goes into the organizers, which we always have trust in them, but here's this additional layer of trust. We've had to reconfigure how we do meetings. So actually, just before I jumped on this call, we're supposed to be in Paris this week to review some of their venues, but instead we go around the venue with they go around with a video camera and sharing a lot more maps. So we're trying to figure out different ways that can work. But I think it's kind of showed two things. One, we have the potential to reduce the amount of travel that we do. We used to have these big meetings where you'd fly in IOC members, IPC members, and it'd be quite expensive and a pretty high carbon footprint to fly people in for certain meetings. And we're actually realizing we can now do some of these remotely. But we're also learning what are some of the meetings we have to do in person. So I think coming out of this, we'll have less travel, which will probably be a permanent change to the industry. But actually, when we have those face-to-face interactions, they'll be more targeted or maybe I'm hoping a better use of time. And then kind of the other big change is a whole bunch of new roles and a whole bunch of new things we've never had to think of before. There's this whole new industry now around COVID and a whole bunch of new policies and procedures, which Japan was not thinking they'd have to do when they won the rights to host the games in 2013. There's so many more expenditures, so many more roles and positions and measures that are being in place that we didn't even know those words existed a year ago. So I think for me, it's constant learning curve and constantly changing. And as we'll take Japan as an example, as numbers in Japan outside of the games context increase, decrease, how their vaccination rollout's going, that has a direct impact on the games as well. So it's not just what we can control, but really what the government of Japan is doing. And we're in constant interaction with them, but obviously they decide what they want to do and what's best for their country.
Wow. No, that was, I mean, that was a lot. It sounds like, I liked how you discussed the long-term impacts and how they could be positive, right? Reducing the carbon footprint. But then also too, how they have been negative, especially for the host city that's going to be doing these games. So my next question to you, and it's actually a twofold question. What do you enjoy most about your current role? And then what is the toughest part?
Okay. What I enjoy most? Well, I think what I have to say, what I enjoy most about it is it's quite a unique environment. Really, there's essentially one of 100 people who work at the IPC who work directly on the Paralympics from the kind of center of the Paralympic movement. And to me, I feel quite honored that I have the privilege to do that. And it gives me a very unique perspective on the games and many opportunities that other types of employment might not have. And also, I really like that I'm part of sport, which I've always really loved, but it's not just about sport. It's about a global movement that goes beyond just the 2 weeks of sporting competition. And I think, and just thinking about this now, I've spoken actually very little about the actual 14 days of the Paralympics. It's all about what happens before the games and happens after the games. And so I think for me, that's really what I enjoy most. And those actual 14 days of the games are kind of not really the relaxing bit, but are this moment in time, but that there's so much more and so much more that can be done after the games as well. So I think being part of a really unique organization that aligns with my values, I think is what I enjoy most about it.
Wow.
And then the other one, the toughest part of the job. I think we've kind of hit on it a little bit, and you've mentioned it, is breaking out those stereotypes, and making awareness of the games. I think that's kind of the toughest part, but is also something that we're working on, and we're really challenging ourselves to make more awareness about the Paralympics and changing words. Even just a few days ago, had someone say, "Oh, so you don't work on the regular Olympics, do you?" And it's this education piece of it's not the regular Olympics, it's the Olympics and the Paralympics, and it's a sport for able-bodied people and people with a disability. And actually, there's a lot of para athletes who also compete at the Olympics as well. So it's about changing those attitudes and building awareness. So I think if we can really kind of get that mentality through, and the mentality that it's really society that focuses on what doesn't work, as opposed to really focusing on what does work and what people can achieve. And I think that's, as soon as we get that message out a bit more, the tough part of my job won't exist. And it's not the athletes that create their handicap, it's actually society that handicaps them. If there's stairs and someone doesn't have the ability to walk, that person isn't handicapped. It's the situation and the environment that has handicapped their ability to move. So I think it kind of all goes into breaking down those barriers, and really that education piece. And as soon as we do more of that, I think the toughness and the hard part of the job will decrease.
Wow, that was a very powerful message. And for me personally, teaching in this space and teaching sport management students, we're constantly trying to understand the terminology and get better and better and better. So, we make it a point to use words like able body and talk about para athletes and focus more on the abilities, right? of these athletes and the narrative of the athlete, and not focusing on, what may be going on with them as far as their physical impairment. So it just motivates me even more. I need to really sit down with you just to make sure I'm up to date with everything, because you just want to make sure that everybody feels included and feels comfortable in that space. And it's just a very important conversation to have. So you're doing so much right now, and I have so much to learn from you. So I can't wait to reconnect, and learn a little bit more.
And Atlanta was actually a good piece of this story as well, because back in '96, it was the very first time that an organizing committee, it was one organizing committee for both the Olympics and Paralympics. It used to be completely separate organizing committees in two different buildings working on the Olympics on the ground and the Paralympics. But Atlanta said, no, we are going to have one committee working on both of them. And really that was a formula that worked moving forward. So I think Atlanta has a lot to do with some of this shift as well. So it's good work on Atlanta.
Good job, Atlanta. There's a lot of exciting things that constantly happen in Atlanta. What I'm finding out since moving here, I feel like we're always on the news, like the national or international news all the time. So my next question to you, you have traveled to so many different places and you've created and been a part of so many events. What is the most memorable moment of your career thus far?
That is incredibly hard question. I think, honestly, I think perhaps at the end, if you were to ask me this on September 6th, the day after the closing ceremonies in Tokyo, I think I'd have a completely different answer. But today, I think I've worked on a games in Toronto, which is my home city. And I think for me, there was something so special about working on an event in my home city, having kind of friends and family and really seeing all of the work that you've done have a lasting impact on your city. It's very unique, going back, or continually going back home, and seeing that some of those things that you've changed or that you've worked on are still there. I think is for me what's really remarkable. And I'm sure that exists in these other cities, but not going back on as regular instance. So for me, I think working on a home games was probably a home city games was something that was very, very special.
Yeah, you get to experience it with your friends and family. That's so exciting, because they're always seeing what you're up to, right, on social media, and here they are right there. So
exactly. I think that made a big difference.
So we're getting down to the last few questions, and my next question to you is about athletes and activism. So what are some of the things that your organization is doing to address these issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think at the heart, well, I think there's one easy answer saying, well, we're at the heart of diversity and inclusion being the Paralympic movement, but that would probably be a bit of a scapegoat response, because you actually kind of need some tangible outcomes of what we're doing. I think one key element which we are working on, and you'll see in Tokyo, is the refugee Paralympic team. And so refugees with a disability could be considered one of the most marginalized groups in the world. First, because they're refugees in the sense they've had to flee their nation due to persecution, humanitarian crises, and had to adapt to new societies, which could be new languages. And then you add on top of that the element of having a disability, and it makes it quite challenging to participate in day-to-day activities. So I think by creating a refugee Paralympic team, which we have gone out and really worked with people around the world who are refugees with a disability, and creating a team which is going to have people from all over the world. It's going to be really important to show the world how diverse we are, but yet we can also come together. So I think that's something that we're trying to do, and we'll see in Tokyo this summer. Also looking at different opportunities to work with our partners and trying to create as many synergies as we can. We're just one organization, but our partners like Toyota, our partners like Airbnb are so big and also have such big reach. So we've partnered with Airbnb to give some Paralympians an opportunity to share their story. A lot of athletes might not have the same revenue streams, let's say, as their Olympic counterparts, but working with Airbnb, they've had an opportunity to expand their network, get a bit more financial income as well, and also share their stories with other people around the world who might have a disability or don't have a disability, and also learn from them. And kind of that last piece about activism is quite a challenging challenging one when it comes to the Olympics and Paralympics. Not sure how much you've spoken in class around the IOC's Rule 50, which is the rule that really limits the ability of an athlete. Not limits, highlights what an athlete can and cannot do on the field of play. And that has been a bit of a contentious issue over what athletes may want to display or not display during the games this summer. So we've really started to work with our athletes and our athletes commission to understand what is important for an athlete. What message do they want to get across? Are there other places that might be appropriate to do this? Might it be in other interviews and press conferences, maybe not on the podium itself, but are there other avenues that still give them that platform to get the message across? But how can we do it safely and consistently for everyone? So I think it was also not just us coming down and saying, this is what you're going to do to show how you want to view your activism, but actually understanding from the athletes themselves what they want to promote and how we can work with them. We also have some exciting campaigns coming down the line for Tokyo around disability movements. So that will be a really great activism piece and campaign launch that you'll see hopefully just in the lead up to Tokyo.
Awesome. You all have so much coming up the pipeline, and I can't wait to check it out. I will be front and center watching it on television, definitely. And I really like how you talked about just engaging with the athletes and really having that discussion and saying, hey, what can we do, right? And not saying what you can and can't do or what are you going to do, right? But coming together and really trying to figure that out. And we do in the class, we do talk about demonstrations, boycotts, just the whole fabric of the Olympics and really understanding, what's going on in the world and looking at the Olympics as basically a microcosm for really just understanding what's going on in the world at that time. So this just brings another piece to the discussion. So thank you.
No problem. It kind of brings the world's focus onto one country, one city all at the same time. And actually kind of going off of what has COVID done, we're in a very unique situation where 6 months after Tokyo, we'll be in Beijing for the Winter Olympics. So that's been a side effect of COVID, is having 2 games back to back. And Beijing 2022 has its own set of quirks and interesting topics that are being discussed, in which various politicians in the US are quite vocal around as well. So I think this discussion will only continue around how we all view Olympic and Paralympic host cities moving forward, not just the athletes, but specifically on the host city and country as well. So it's only going to continue. And after Tokyo, 6 months, we'll do it all again.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. So yeah, thank you for reminding me. Now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go back a couple of years and see the timeline about how everything will progress. So I keep saying my last few questions, but I really mean it this time. What advice do you have for current students who would want to pursue a career path such as the one you have chosen?
I think what's interesting about kind of this career path is once you get your foot in the door, it's really, you can kind of keep jumping and jumping as long as you're open to new ideas and open to maybe new countries and new roles. But so I think the first step is, how do you get your foot in the door to begin with? And that probably really is the hardest piece. And so it's all about differentiating yourself. And one of the biggest things when I'm looking at hiring anyone is what have they done? And for me, seeing volunteerism is such a big positive tick. It shows so many positive traits. It shows that you're willing to put time set aside for someone else. It shows what your interests are. So if someone's volunteering with parasport communities, that probably genuinely means they're interested in parasport, as opposed to a job just coming up and them all of a sudden really liking to work with people with a disability. So I think showing your history of where you've worked, where you volunteered, really shows what you're interested in. And volunteering in sport is very easy to get your foot in the door. Organizing committees, whether big or small, local level events, are always looking for people to help out in all types of capacities. So would strongly recommend to get involved in any way to do that. And I think the other piece of advice is, in quite a number of interviews or in cover letters, people say, I love sport, I've done sport since I was a kid, so I want this job. But I think for me, that kind of just goes over my head. It's really finding out, what do you like about sport? So it's asking yourselves, what element do you like about it? Do you like the commercial and advertising bit? Do you like the political element of it? Do you like sport for change? What element of sport do you like? And hopefully you find that through your volunteer work, and then you'll have something to discuss in the interview that goes deeper than, I watch the games on the TV. So I think that for me are kind of those two big pieces of advice. Learn what you actually like about sport management and sport, and really drive home that unique selling feature that you have about yourself.
Thank you for that advice. And I like at the crux of that, it's volunteer, right? And then figure out what you really like about it. So those of you out there, volunteer, 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 right? Get your foot in the door. That's what it's about. So my next question, it's actually has to do with me, but what should sport management professors like myself be teaching students so that we can better prepare them for a career path such as yours?
Uh-huh. I think something I wish I had done a bit more, learned a bit more about, is project management. I think talking a little bit about a day in the life, you are managing so many different projects, but what are some of the tools and how do you best manage a project? And so I think project management is such a key skill that, at least on my end, it wasn't really taught. So for me, if I had more project management skill and base, that would be very helpful. And there's some certifications in project management, and more we're starting to ask for that from applicants as well. So I think kind of thinking a bit more of a games as a project, and then getting those skills. How do you properly budget? How do you communicate what your issues? How do you schedule? How do you work with stakeholders? All those elements of project management, I think, could really be driven home a bit more. And I think something that would be really great as well is, I mentioned volunteering, and that's kind of on the onus of the individual, but for yourself is thinking how you could help your students volunteer, and linking in with sporting events and organizations. For example, on our end, the IOC has a bit of a connection with another university, and so we often take 20 or 30 volunteers during the games period, and we go out and we bring them to the games, and we say, go collect data for us. How many people are sitting in these stands? How many people are doing this? Because we always want good data on the games. And so we use university students to really help us. So I think trying to connect with the right people, and then offering your students those opportunities, then again gives them a leg up once they come out of college and hit the ground running, gives them some nice real world experience. So finding those connections, whether it's in Atlanta or more globally.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that piece of advice. I really was listening closely with the project management. Some people aren't too keen on group projects or working with other people. And I think you kind of, made a really good point right there. And then also to the certification. So I have to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Here in Atlanta, we're actually very blessed in the past week. Well, not right now, everything with COVID, but we've had a lot of really great events, right? So the 96 Olympics were here. We've had the Super Bowl. We've had college football playoffs, and we were supposed to have the Final Four. And I know that we have a bid in right now to host a World Cup game, right? With the United bid. So fingers crossed with the new Mercedes-Benz Stadium. But yeah, Atlanta's a pretty cool place. And so a lot of volunteer opportunities for students out there. Take advantage of that here while it's in your backyard. So my last question, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Just a couple, just little points, which one is the kind of events industry, if this is kind of the path you're really keen on, is working on these major sports, is not a typical career path. But it's not linear, and it's constantly changing, but it is extremely fun. It's really hard to explain to anybody what you actually do, but it is a very interesting field that's constantly changing. And every day I'm having the opportunity to not only lead and make change, but I learn every day as well. And I think for me, that's a big part of it, is I'm leading and learning, and often I don't feel like I'm actually at work. So I think whether major events is for you or not, I think just finding that career path that doesn't feel like work is really important. And one of the big things I've learned in sport is how small sport actually is. And I'm not sure if that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, but sport, to actually run a sporting event, involves so many different aspects, whether it's branding or marketing, finance, catering, government relations, transport, security, the list goes on. In any major games, there's 50 different units, and only one unit is actually about sport. The other 49 units are about everything except sport. So there's something in it for everyone, and something you can really get your teeth into. When I was kind of mentioning what are you interested in, it could be about one of those elements, whether it could be about the legal system of sport. That's another really interesting area. So I think there's just so many elements out there to get involved in. And the last little point I'll do is a plug for a Paralympic movie that's on Netflix, which if you haven't had the opportunity to watch, go onto Netflix and watch it right away. It's called Rising Phoenix. It came out last year on the day of what was supposed to be the opening ceremonies of the Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games. And it just provides a really great overview of the International Paralympic Committee, the Paralympics, and tells the story of some amazing athletes, including Tatiana McFadden, who is an amazing American Paralympian who's medaled both in the summer and winter games. So Rising Phoenix on Netflix, definitely recommend.
Awesome. No, thank you for telling us about that. I'm going to go home. I'm going to watch that. Somebody actually mentioned that to me the other day. So definitely something I want to tune in and watch. So no, I'm going, yeah, well, seriously, I'm looking for more things to watch on Netflix. So that's perfect. Well, that pretty much is it. So thank you so much for your time. I just really enjoyed talking to you. I know the students enjoyed hearing from you. There's just so much that's going on with what you do. So many amazing things, just as far as social change goes, event planning, all of that. So thank you so much for just sharing all your insight, your wisdom, and just being present with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. And it's always lovely to talk. And to any students out there who want to reach out, definitely pass along my contact information. I'm always happy to continue the conversation and to keep chatting.
Amazing. So thank you so much. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye.